1962. Bumpy Johnson walked into Romano's restaurant alone, facing 8 armed men and their boss who mocked him like a fool. 90 seconds later, everything changed. What did Bumpy do that turned their laughter into desperate pleas for mercy to understand how it all led here? We go back to where it truly began. March 15th, 1962. Romano's restaurant on Mulberry Street. The door swung open, and Bumpy Johnson stepped inside alone. The laughter started immediately. Vincent Torino sat at the back corner table, his right hand 6 inches from a Colt .45 resting on the white tablecloth, when he saw Bumpy walk through that door without backup, without security, without even a visible weapon. Something inside him broke loose. A laugh. Not polite. Not restrained. The kind of laugh that came from deep in the chest. The kind that said a man had just witnessed something so absurd, so monumentally stupid, that he couldn't contain himself. This arrogant bastard actually showed up alone. Torino's voice carried through the entire restaurant, bouncing off darkened windows and locked doors. His shoulders shook with amusement. His face went red from the effort of breathing between bursts of mockery. Tommy Marchetti, positioned nearest the entrance with a sawed-off shotgun across his thighs, started laughing next, then Paulie Greco near the kitchen, gripping a .45 caliber pistol. Then the other 6 men scattered throughout the space, each holding weapons capable of ending a life in less than 2 seconds. 8 men total, 8 firearms, 8 voices joining in a chorus of contempt that filled the room like smoke. He really thinks he's walking out of here, Carmine wheezed, slapping the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. Look at him dressed like he's going to church. Bumpy stood just inside the entrance, his gray suit pressed and perfect, an old leather briefcase in his right hand. His face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, not even acknowledgement that 8 men were laughing at what they believed would be his final moments, alive. Torino wiped tears from his eyes. I knew you had balls, Bumpy, stupid balls. But I didn't know you were this stupid. You walk in here like you're somebody, like you matter, like this isn't an execution. 90 seconds later, Vincent Torino would be on his knees, his face the color of spoiled milk, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't light a cigarette, his voice reduced to something between a whisper and a plea. Begging. Actually begging. Not for money, not for territory, for his life, for mercy from the man he'd been mocking just moments before. But to understand how laughter turned to terror that quickly, how mockery became pleading in the time it takes to smoke half a cigarette. We need to go back to where the disrespect started. Back to the first time Vincent Torino looked at Bumpy Johnson and decided he was dealing with someone small, someone unimportant, someone who could be dismissed with a laugh and a wave of the hand. 6 months earlier, September 1961. The Manhattan waterfront where cargo containers stacked 3 stories high and longshoremen earned their payloading ships bound for ports most of them would never see. Bumpy Johnson arrived in a black Cadillac that cost more than the annual salary of everyone working that dock. He stepped out wearing a suit that had been tailored on 5th Avenue, carrying that same leather briefcase that didn't contain a weapon, but something far more dangerous. A contract. A legitimate business proposal to provide shipping insurance to independent freight companies at rates 40% lower than what they were currently paying. Vincent Torino was already there, standing outside Warehouse 7 with 3 of his enforcers, men whose knuckles bore scars from breaking jaws and whose jackets bulged with firearms they'd used enough times that the act of taking a life had become mechanical. Routine, something done between breakfast and lunch without a second thought. Bumpy walked toward them. His footsteps echoed on the concrete. He didn't slow down, didn't alter his path, just kept walking like he owned every inch of ground his shoes touched. Torino watched him approach with the kind of expression a man wears when he's spotted a stray dog wandering where it doesn't belong. Amused, slightly annoyed, completely confident in his ability to handle the situation. When Bumpy was 10 feet away, Torino raised his hand and pointed directly at Bumpy's face. Not a gesture, a dismissal. The kind of thing you do to children or servants or people so far beneath you that words seem like wasted effort. "Harlem boy," Torino said, his voice loud enough for the dock workers to hear, loud enough to carry across the waterfront like a public announcement. "Go back where you belong. This isn't your playground." Carmine, standing to Torino's left, let out a bark of laughter. Then the other two enforcers joined in. Within seconds, dock workers were glancing over, trying to figure out what was funny. Some of them starting to smile just because laughter was contagious, even when you didn't know the joke. Bumpy stopped walking. He stood there, briefcase in hand, looking at Torino the way you might look at furniture you're deciding whether to sit in or throw through a window. His expression gave away nothing. No embarrassment, no anger, just a cold, calculating assessment of the situation unfolding around him. "I'm here to discuss business with people who want better insurance rates," Bumpy said quietly. His voice didn't carry like Torino's had. It didn't need to. "You have a problem with that. We can talk about it somewhere private. You don't have a problem with that. I'll finish my meeting and leave." Torino smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, the kind that said he was enjoying this more than he should. "No problem at all," Torino replied, still pointing at Bumpy's face. "Free country. A man can do business wherever he wants. But let me give you some friendly advice. Harlem boy, these docks, they have rules. Old rules. Rules written in concrete and dropped in the Hudson River with people who forgot them. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand perfectly," Bumpy said. Carmine stepped forward, his chest puffed out like a rooster in a henhouse. "Then you understand you need to turn around, get back in that fancy car, and drive north, 20 blocks north, back to Harlem where you know how things work." More laughter, louder this time. The dock workers who'd been pretending not to listen were now openly watching, some of them grinning, some of them looking nervous because they recognized what was happening. A man was being humiliated in public, told to leave, shown that he didn't matter, that he never would. Bumpy stood there for 5 full seconds, not moving, not speaking, just looking at each face in turn, memorizing them, recording every detail like a camera, taking photographs that would be developed later in a darkroom built from patience and planning. Then he turned and walked back to his Cadillac, got inside, drove away without looking back. Inside Bumpy's head, a single thought formed with the clarity of a bell being struck in an empty room. Good. Let them laugh. Let them think they won. I'll remember this. I'll remember every face, every voice, every moment of disrespect. And 3 years from now, when they're wearing handcuffs and facing federal charges, I'll remind them of this exact moment. I'll make sure they understand that their laughter was the most expensive sound they ever made. But the humiliation wasn't finished. Torino wasn't satisfied with private mockery. He wanted it public, wanted it witnessed, wanted everyone on the waterfront to understand exactly where Bumpy Johnson ranked in the hierarchy of power that controlled these docks. 3 weeks later, the Union Hall on West Street, where longshoremen gathered to collect paychecks and argue about baseball games they'd listened to on radios the night before. 50 men packed into a space meant for 30, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of coffee that had been sitting on a hot plate since early morning. Bumpy walked in carrying that same briefcase, wearing a different suit but the same expression of calm determination. He'd been invited by the hall steward, a man named O'Brien who'd heard about the insurance rates Bumpy was offering and wanted to discuss bringing them to the union membership for a vote. Vincent Torino was already there, sitting at a table in the back, waiting, like he'd known Bumpy would show up, like he'd planned this entire encounter down to the minute. When Bumpy walked past Torino's table, heading toward O'Brien's office, Torino stood up fast enough to knock his chair backward. It hit the floor with a crack that made the entire room go quiet. "Look who's back," Torino announced to the 50 men watching. "The Harlem boy who doesn't listen." Bumpy stopped, turned around, looked at Torino with those same calculating eyes that gave away nothing except that everything was being recorded, catalogued, stored for future use. Torino walked over, slowly, taking his time, making sure every man in that hall understood this was theater, performance, a public demonstration of who held power and who was pretending to. When he reached Bumpy, Torino did something that made several men in the room wince. He reached out and patted Bumpy on the shoulder. Not hard, not violent, just condescending. The way you'd pat a child who'd tried to do something beyond their ability and failed predictably. "Go home," Torino said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Go home before I start getting serious about this, before I stop being polite and start being Italian." The laughter that followed was louder than before. 50 men, some of them laughing because they were nervous, some because they genuinely thought it was funny, some because laughing with Torino seemed safer than staying silent. Carmine was standing near the coffee pot, laughing so hard he had to set his cup down to keep from spilling it. Maybe he's lost. Maybe he thinks this is 125th Street. More laughter. Someone near the back made a joke Bumpy couldn't quite hear, but the response it got suggested it wasn't kind. Bumpy stood perfectly still. Torino's hand was still on his shoulder. 50 pairs of eyes were watching, waiting to see if he'd react, if he'd swing, if he'd pull a weapon, if he'd do anything that would justify what would come next. Instead, Bumpy smiled. Small, cold, the kind of smile that didn't mean happiness or amusement, the kind that meant a decision had been made, a line had been crossed, a debt had been recorded in a ledger that would eventually come due with interest. "Enjoy yourself, Vincent," Bumpy said quietly. Only Torino and the men closest to them could hear. "Laugh as much as you want. I'm keeping track. 3 years from now, I'm going to play these sounds back to you, and you're going to remember this moment differently." Then Bumpy turned and walked out of the union hall. Behind him, the laughter continued, grew louder even. Men slapping tables and elbowing each other, repeating Torino's lines, adding their own commentary about Harlem boys who didn't know their place. Inside Bumpy's mind, a list was forming. Names, faces, every person who'd laughed, every person who'd joined in the mockery. He didn't write it down, didn't need to. The kind of memory Bumpy Johnson possessed was photographic, permanent, incapable of forgetting an insult or forgiving a disrespect without proper compensation. Remember them, he thought as he walked to his Cadillac. Remember every face. In 3 years, they'll be crying. Some of them will be in prison. Some will be unemployed. All of them will understand that laughter has a price, and I'm about to spend 3 years calculating exactly what they owe. The insults might have stayed verbal, might have remained in the realm of words and gestures and public humiliation. But Torino wasn't satisfied with breaking Bumpy's pride. He wanted to break his business, wanted to prove that a man from Harlem couldn't operate on the waterfront no matter how legitimate his contracts or how good his rates. 2 months after the Union Hall incident, a freight company owner named Samuel Morrison made the mistake of switching his insurance coverage to one of Bumpy's providers. Morrison ran a small operation, 3 trucks and a warehouse in Red Hook, shipping textiles to department stores in Philadelphia and Boston. The insurance he'd been paying through Torino's company was bleeding him dry. Bumpy's rate was 40% lower for better coverage. It should have been an easy business decision. It was until 3 men walked into Morrison's office after business hours on a cold November evening. Carmine did the talking. Or rather, Carmine did the demonstrating. He grabbed Morrison's right hand, pressed it flat against the wooden desk. And before Morrison could process what was happening, Carmine picked up a letter opener and drove it straight through Morrison's palm. The scream Morrison made could be heard 3 blocks away. The kind of sound that comes from a place deeper than pain, where the brain recognizes that the body has been violated in a way that can't be undone. Carmine left the letter opener embedded in the desk, pinning Morrison's hand like a butterfly in a collection. Blood pooled on the quarterly reports spread across the desk surface, turning numbers and profit margins red. "Next time we have this conversation," Carmine said while Morrison screamed and his hand bled and his brain tried to process how his life had just changed in 3 seconds. "It won't be your hand. It'll be your wife's hand. You understand what I'm saying?" Morrison understood perfectly the next morning. Shaking and pale, his hand wrapped in bandages that would need to be changed twice a day for 3 weeks, he called Bumpy's office and canceled his insurance policy. Called Torino's company and begged to be reinstated at whatever rate they wanted to charge. But Morrison did something else. Something Carmine hadn't anticipated. Something that would eventually lead to Romano's restaurant and handcuffs and federal charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences measured in decades. Morrison went to the police, showed them his wounded hand, filed a formal complaint with photographs and a sworn statement detailing exactly who had put a hole through his palm and why. The police did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Half the precinct was on Torino's payroll. The other half knew better than to investigate complaints against connected men who could make problems disappear, along with the people who caused them. But Morrison's complaint didn't disappear. It sat in a filing cabinet. A piece of paper, a photograph, a sworn statement, evidence that would eventually find its way into hands that couldn't be bribed or intimidated. When word reached Bumpy about what happened to Morrison, Illinois Gordon brought the news personally. Walked into Bumpy's office above the grocery store on 135th Street and laid it out plain. Carmine put a letter opener through Morrison's hand. Told him it would be his wife next time. Morrison canceled his policy with us, went back to Torino. Illinois expected rage, expected Bumpy to start making calls, gathering men, planning retaliation, expected violence to answer violence because that was how these things worked, how they'd always worked. Instead, Bumpy sat quietly at his desk for 10 full seconds. Then he opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a manila folder, thick, already containing documents and photographs and notes written in Bumpy's precise handwriting. "Send a message to Morrison," Bumpy said, his voice calm as still water. "Tell him I understand. Tell him his wife is safe. Tell him I'm sorry this happened. Then ask him if he'd be willing to file a police report." Photographs of his hand. Statement about who did it and why. Everything documented. Illinois stared. "Police won't do anything. Half of them work for Torino." "I know," Bumpy replied. He was already writing something in the folder, adding Morrison's name to a list that was growing longer each week. "But the FBI doesn't work for Torino. Not yet. And I'm building something the FBI will care about very much. Every time Torino's people threaten someone. Every time Carmine puts a hole in someone's hand. Every time they think violence is the answer. They're giving me exactly what I need." "What are you building?" Illinois asked. Bumpy looked up from the folder. His eyes were cold, calculating. The eyes of a man who'd stopped thinking in terms of days or weeks and started thinking in terms of years. "A cage," Bumpy said. "I'm building a cage. Every insult Torino throws is another bar. Every time his men laugh, I add another lock. Every act of violence is another year added to the sentence. Morrison's wounded hand. That's worth 5 years in federal prison. Maybe more. I'm keeping track. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every crime. And when the cage is finished, I'm going to walk Torino into it myself and watch the door lock behind him. That could take years," Illinois said. 3 years, Bumpy replied. "I've already been working on this for 6 months. I need another 30 months to make it airtight, to gather enough evidence that even Torino's lawyers can't argue their way out, to build something so solid that the FBI has no choice but to act." Illinois shook his head slowly. "He's going to keep coming at you, keep disrespecting you, keep laughing." "Good," Bumpy said. He closed the folder and locked it back in the drawer. "Let him laugh. Let him think he's winning. Let him get so confident that he makes mistakes. Big mistakes. The kind that federal prosecutors dream about. Every laugh is another piece of evidence. Every insult is another witness. Torino thinks he's humiliating me. What he's actually doing is building his own prison cell one brick at a time." That same evening, after Illinois left, Bumpy made a phone call to a number he'd been given by a mutual contact, a number that rang in an FBI field office in Lower Manhattan, where an agent named Robert Davis had been trying for 3 years to build a case against waterfront corruption without success because everyone was too terrified to testify. They met 2 hours later, a parking garage in Queens, 2 in the morning. Davis arrived alone, suspicious, his hand near his weapon because meeting a known Harlem operator in a dark parking garage at that hour wasn't standard FBI protocol. Bumpy handed him a folder, thinner than the one locked in his desk drawer, but substantial enough. "Vincent Torino," Bumpy said without preamble, "controls the Manhattan waterfront through intimidation and violence. This folder contains documentation of extortion, assault, and evidence suggesting weapons trafficking. 3 witnesses willing to provide sworn statements, photographs, police reports that were filed and ignored." Davis opened the folder, started reading. His expression shifted from suspicious to interested to hungry. The kind of hunger that comes from spending 3 years chasing something that kept slipping away, and suddenly finding it sitting in front of you wrapped in a bow. "Where did you get this?" Davis asked. "That doesn't matter," Bumpy replied. "What matters is whether it's enough to start building a case." "It's a start," Davis admitted, "but I need more. I need patterns, multiple incidents, evidence that shows ongoing criminal enterprise, not just isolated acts." "I can get you more," Bumpy said. "I can get you 3 years' worth of documentation, every crime, every witness, every piece of evidence you need to put Torino and everyone who works for him in federal prison for the rest of their lives. But I need something from you in return." "What sauce? Patience," Bumpy said. "I need you to wait, to let me keep gathering evidence, to not move too soon. Torino's people are making mistakes because they think they're untouchable. If you arrest them now, you'll get convictions. But if you wait, if you give me 3 years, I'll give you something bigger, something that dismantles the entire operation, something that sends a message no one will forget." Davis studied Bumpy's face in the dim parking garage light. "You're using yourself as bait." "I'm using their arrogance as bait," Bumpy corrected. "They think I'm beneath them. They think a man from Harlem can't compete. They're wrong. And every time they underestimate me, every time they laugh, they're giving me exactly what I need to destroy them." Davis closed the folder. 3 years. 3 years, Bumpy confirmed. "At the end, you'll have evidence that could convict them all. But you have to let me work. You have to trust me. And when the time comes, when I tell you it's ready, You need to be prepared to move fast. Davis thought about it for 30 seconds. Then he nodded. Call me when you're ready. I'll be there. They shook hands in that parking garage, a deal made between men who understood that patience was a weapon. That evidence lasted longer than bullets, that the law, properly applied, was more dangerous than any firearm ever manufactured. Bumpy drove back to Harlem as the sun started rising over the East River, inside his mind. The plan was crystallizing. 3 years, 36 months, 1,000 days of letting Torino laugh while Bumpy built something that would echo in federal courtrooms long after the laughter had died. Torino thought he'd won, thought he'd put Bumpy in his place, thought the mockery and violence had settled the question of who controlled the waterfront. He was wrong. The game had just started, and Bumpy Johnson was playing a version Torino didn't even know existed. The weapon Bumpy Johnson needed didn't come from a gun shop or an armory. It came from a loading dock on a Tuesday afternoon in August 1959, wrapped in the form of a terrified 19-year-old kid named Michael Riachi. Michael was invisible. That was his greatest asset and his most dangerous liability. He worked the docks because his uncle was connected, and his father owed favors to people who collected debts with baseball bats and cement shoes. He moved crates without asking what was inside them, signed manifests without reading them, did what he was told because asking questions was how young men ended up floating face down in the Hudson River, with their hands wired behind their backs. Vincent Torino had looked at Michael 1,000 times and never really seen him. Just another Italian kid with a strong back and a weak brain, the kind of muscle that moved cargo and kept its mouth shut. Torino had even joked about him once, standing outside Warehouse 7 with Carmine and 2 other enforcers, watching Michael struggle with a crate marked agricultural equipment that actually contained M1 rifles stolen from Fort Dix. "Look at that kid," Torino had said, laughing. "Doesn't even have the balls to look me in the eye when I talk to him. Probably pisses himself every time he sees me coming." Carmine had grinned. Perfect soldier. Too scared to ask questions. Too stupid to figure things out on his own. What Torino didn't know, what he couldn't have known because his arrogance made him blind to possibilities, was that the scared kid who couldn't look him in the eye was about to become the most dangerous person on that waterfront. Bumpy found Michael exactly where he knew he'd be, standing outside Warehouse 7 during a smoke break, trying to calm nerves that had been frayed by 3 months of moving illegal weapons and wondering when someone was going to notice. When someone was going to ask questions, he couldn't answer. "You're Michael Ricci," Bumpy said, walking up like they were old friends meeting for coffee. Michael dropped his cigarette. His hand moved instinctively toward his waistband where he kept a switchblade he'd never actually used. "Who wants to know?" "Someone who knows you owe $12,000 to a bookmaker in the Bronx," Bumpy replied calmly. "Someone who knows your uncle isn't going to cover that debt. Someone who knows that when you can't pay, they're going to break both your legs with a tire iron, starting with the kneecaps and working their way down until there's nothing left but splinters and screaming." "Huh." Michael's face went the color of old newspaper. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Bumpy said. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and held it out. $12,000, cash, enough to pay your debt today. Walk away clean. All I need in return is information." Michael stared at the envelope like it might explode. "What kind of information?" "The kind that comes in crates marked agricultural equipment but actually contains military rifles. The kind that gets loaded onto trucks at midnight when customs inspectors have been paid to look the other way. The kind that your boss Vincent Torino has been trafficking through these docks for 5 years. "You're asking me to rat," Michael whispered. His hands were shaking badly enough that he had to shove them in his pockets. "You know what they do to rats? They don't just kill you. They kill your mother, your sister, Everyone you've ever cared about. They make it slow. They make it hurt. They make sure everyone knows what happens when you talk. Bumpy's expression didn't change. Take the money. Pay the bookmaker. Start keeping a journal. Dates, times, what comes in, what goes out, who signs off, who gets paid. You do that for 3 years, and I make sure you're protected when this comes down. You don't do that. I put the word out that you already talked, and Torino comes for you anyway. Except this time, you die for nothing instead of dying rich enough to give your mother a decent burial. Michael took the envelope. His hands were shaking so badly the cash inside rustled like leaves in wind. How do I know you'll keep your word? You don't, Bumpy stated. But I've been in this business for 30 years. I'm still alive because I keep my promises. Torino's been running these docks for 15 years. Half the people who worked for him back then are dead or in prison. You decide who's more likely to keep you breathing, Michael decided. For 3 years, he kept a journal, a spiral notebook he hid under a loose floorboard in his apartment. He wrote down everything in handwriting so small and precise it looked like ant tracks on paper. Dates and times of weapon shipments, license plate numbers of trucks, names of customs inspectors who signed documents without opening crates, names of police officers who provided escort services for cargo that couldn't afford attention. Every 2 weeks, one of Bumpy's people would collect the notebook. A woman named Sarah, who worked as a secretary in a shipping office and could walk through the docks without raising suspicion. She'd photograph every page with a camera small enough to fit in her purse, then return the notebook within 24 hours. Always before Michael's shift started. Always before anyone noticed it was missing. By 1961, Bumpy had a file 3 inches thick. Photographs of crates being unloaded. Recordings of phone conversations between Torino and buyers discussing prices for merchandise that officially didn't exist. Copies of customs documents that had been altered. Bank records showing deposits that corresponded exactly to weapon sales. Down to the dollar. Everything documented. Everything dated. Everything verified through multiple sources. The kind of evidence that federal prosecutors see maybe once in their entire careers. But having evidence wasn't enough. Evidence was useless if the people reviewing it were on Torino's payroll or too scared to act. Bumpy needed someone who couldn't be bought and wouldn't be intimidated. Someone with the authority to turn documentation into handcuffs and prison sentences. While Bumpy was building his case in silence, Vincent Torino was getting louder, more confident, more openly contemptuous of the man he believed he'd already beaten. At a restaurant in Little Italy, 3 months before the envelope would arrive at Small's Paradise. Torino sat with 6 of his associates around a table covered with wine bottles and cigar smoke. The conversation had turned to business, specifically, to the problem that wouldn't go away no matter how many times they'd tried to make it disappear. That colored guy from Harlem, one of the associates said, he's still operating, still signing insurance contracts, still cutting into our profits. Torino laughed. Actually laughed. The sound filled the private dining room like water filling a glass. That guy. You're worried about him. Who does he think he is? Rockefeller. He shows up in his fancy suits thinking he can compete with us. With Italians who've been running these docks since before his grandfather was born. Carmine poured more wine. Our profits are down 40% in 2 years. That's not nothing. It's temporary, Torino insisted. He lit a cigar with a match he struck on his thumbnail. He's bribing someone. Has to be. No way a guy from Harlem is smart enough to outmaneuver us legitimately. We just haven't figured out who he's paying yet. When we do, we'll cut off his supply, and he'll crawl back to where he belongs. What if he's not bribing anyone? Another associate asked quietly. What if he's just better at this than we thought? The table went silent. Torino's smile disappeared. He leaned forward, the cigar clamped between his teeth. smoke curling up past his eyes. Better than us. Torino's voice had gone cold. A colored guy from Harlem is better than 5 generations of Italians who built this waterfront with their blood and their balls. That's what you're suggesting. The associate who'd asked the question looked down at his wine glass. I'm just saying the numbers don't lie. The numbers are temporary, Torino repeated. He stood up, walked to the window overlooking Mulberry Street. I've dealt with guys like him before. They come in thinking they're smart, thinking they can change things, thinking the old rules don't apply anymore. And you know what happens to them, they disappear. They get buried under so many problems they can't dig their way out. They learn that some territories belong to people who are willing to do whatever it takes to keep them. When word of that conversation reached Bumpy through sources he maintained throughout Little Italy, sources that Torino didn't know existed because he'd never bothered to consider that a man from Harlem might have eyes and ears where Italians spoke freely. Bumpy smiled, not with amusement, with satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that comes from watching someone dig their own grave deeper while insisting they're building a foundation. Keep thinking that way, Vincent, Bumpy said to Illinois when the report came in. Keep believing I'm not smart enough. Keep underestimating what I'm capable of. Every assumption you make is another year I'm adding to your sentence. But Torino wasn't finished making assumptions. Wasn't finished digging. His frustration was growing like infection in a wound that wouldn't heal. Profits kept dropping. His political protection was evaporating as politicians he'd owned for years suddenly faced primary challenges from reformers with war chests Torino couldn't match. His grip on the waterfront was loosening, and he couldn't figure out how or why, because he refused to consider that he was being outplayed by someone he'd dismissed as irrelevant. So he did what men like Vincent Torino always do when they can't win through intimidation and can't compete through intelligence. He decided to eliminate the problem permanently. The envelope arrived at Small's Paradise just after midnight on March 13th, 1962. The man who delivered it was young, maybe 22. Italian, wearing a suit that cost more than most people earned in a month. He wasn't there to drink, wasn't there to listen to Duke Ellington on the jukebox or watch couples dance. He was there to deliver a message, the kind of message that usually required funerals afterward. He walked straight to the bar where Junie Bird was counting receipts from the evening shift, set down a cream-colored envelope with Bumpy Johnson's name written in fountain pen across the front. The handwriting was elegant, precise, the kind of penmanship they taught in expensive Catholic schools. For your boss, the man said. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. He has 48 hours to respond. If he doesn't respond, people in Harlem start dying. Not him. Not at first. The people around him die first. Then we come for him. Junie's hand moved under the bar toward the .45 caliber pistol taped to the underside. The Italian saw the movement and smiled. Not nervous, not concerned, just amused. You pull that gun, the Italian said. I have 3 men outside who will turn this place into a morgue. Bodies everywhere. Blood on your nice clean floor. Police asking questions you don't want to answer. You don't pull it, I walk out, and you give that envelope to Bumpy. Your choice. Junie's hand stayed where it was. The Italian walked out. The music kept playing. But nobody was dancing anymore. Everyone in Small's Paradise understood what had just happened. The Italians had drawn a line. Cross it and start a war. Stay behind it and look weak. Either way, Harlem was about to bleed. Junie called Bumpy at midnight. Bumpy arrived 20 minutes later, walking through the door like he owned every inch of floor his shoes touched. Junie handed him the envelope without speaking. Bumpy took it, turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of the paper, the quality of the stock. Expensive. Like everything Torino did, show and substance wrapped together in a package designed to intimidate. Bumpy opened it carefully. Inside was an address in Little Italy and a time. 2:30 in the afternoon, March 15th. Below that, one sentence written in the same elegant handwriting. Come alone or Harlem learns what happens when protection isn't enough. Bumpy read it twice, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. His face showed nothing. No fear, no anger, just calculation. Like he was reading a weather report that might affect his plans for the weekend. Who brought this? Bumpy asked. Italian, young, early 20s, confident, had the attitude of someone who thought he was bulletproof. Bumpy nodded. Get Illinois, get Willie, get Clayton. My apartment in 1 hour. 1 hour later, 4 men sat around a table in Bumpy's apartment above the grocery store on 135th Street. The envelope sat in the center like evidence at a trial. No music playing, no drinks served. Just 4 men looking at a piece of paper that was trying to dictate how the next 48 hours would unfold. Illinois Gordon spoke first. He was the oldest, the most experienced, the one who'd seen enough wars to know how they started and how they ended, and how many people died in between. This is a trap, Illinois said flatly. They want you in a location they control. They want you dead. We don't let you walk into this. We hit them first. Tonight. Before they're ready. Willie Gaines nodded agreement. He was younger than Illinois, faster to anger, quicker to reach for violence as a solution. We know where Torino lives. We put a bomb under his car. Problem solved. No trap, no risk. Just one explosion and the waterfront opens up like a door we just kicked down. Clayton Moore shook his head. He was the strategist, the thinker, the one who played chess while others played checkers. You kill Torino, the Genovese family gets involved. You start a war with people who have more soldiers than we do. More money, more political connections. Maybe we win. Maybe. But we win at a cost that leaves Harlem burning. The 3 of them turned to Bumpy, waiting for his decision, waiting to see if he'd choose violence or strategy, immediate action or long-term planning, the old way or something different. Bumpy stared at the envelope for 10 full seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried weight that filled the room like gravity. No bombs, Bumpy said. No war. No hitting them first. Illinois leaned forward. They invited you to your funeral. You walk in there alone. You die alone. The math is wrong. 8 guns against 1 man. Those odds don't work. You're counting guns, Bumpy replied. I'm counting years, and for 3 years, I've been building a federal case against Torino. Weapons trafficking. Stolen military rifles moving through the waterfront. Every shipment documented. Every bribe recorded. I gave it all to the FBI. Agent Robert Davis has a warrant ready. He's been waiting for the right moment. The moment when all of Torino's people are in one place with weapons visible and intent clear. Willie's eyes narrowed. What moment? 2:30 in the afternoon on March 15th, Bumpy said, at whatever address is on that invitation. When I walk inside and Torino thinks he's about to kill me. When all his men are there with guns drawn. When the FBI kicks down the door and finds armed felons committing conspiracy to commit murder on top of federal weapons charges. The room went silent. Understanding spread across 3 faces like sunrise. You're using yourself as bait, Illinois said slowly. I'm using their arrogance as bait, Bumpy corrected. They think I'm scared. Think I'm desperate. Think I'll either run or show up ready to beg for my life. They're wrong. I'm going to walk in there calm. I'm going to sit down. And I'm going to show them 3 years' worth of evidence while the FBI listens through a wire taped to my chest. Then, I'm going to watch their faces when they realize the trap wasn't for me. It was for them. Clayton exhaled slowly. What if the timing's wrong? What if Torino shoots you before the FBI gets through the door? Bumpy pulled a small tape recorder from his pocket, no bigger than a pack of cigarettes. I'll be wearing a wire. Agent Davis will be listening from a vehicle parked around the block. The second Torino threatens me. The second any of them makes a move that constitutes probable cause. The FBI comes through the door. Federal agents with federal authority and federal charges that even Torino's lawyers can't make disappear. And if it goes wrong, Willie asked, then you don't start a war. Bumpy said firmly. You give all the evidence to Agent Davis and let the FBI finish what I started. Promise me. No revenge. No retaliation. Just let the law do what the law is designed to do. Illinois looked at the other two. They nodded. Slowly, reluctantly, but they nodded. We promise, Illinois said. But you better walk out. Bumpy. Harlem needs you alive. Bumpy stood. Walked to the window, looked out at Harlem sleeping under streetlights that turned the night orange. Torino thinks he's teaching me a lesson, Bumpy said quietly. Thinks he's showing Harlem who has power and who doesn't. What he doesn't understand is that I've been teaching him a lesson for 3 years. Every time he laughed at me, I added evidence. Every time he disrespected me, I added another witness. Every time he thought violence was the answer, I documented it and added another year to his sentence. In 48 hours, he's going to understand exactly what kind of lesson I've been teaching. For 48 hours, Harlem held its breath. Word spread about the envelope, about the deadline, about Bumpy being called to Little Italy alone. Barbershops went quiet. Corner stores closed early. People stayed inside and locked their doors because when wars start between Harlem and Little Italy, bullets don't check addresses before they hit. March 15th arrived like a storm everyone could see coming, but nobody could stop. Bumpy woke at 6 in the morning, ate breakfast, eggs and toast, coffee black, the same breakfast he'd eaten every morning for 30 years. Routine. Normal. Like this was any other day instead of the day that would determine whether he died in a restaurant or whether Vincent Torino died in a prison cell. He dressed in his gray suit. The good one. The one tailored on Fifth Avenue that fit perfectly across the shoulders and broke exactly right at the shoes. If he was going to walk into a trap, he was going to look like someone who mattered, someone who couldn't be dismissed. Someone who deserved respect even from people who were planning to kill him. At 1:15 in the afternoon, Agent Robert Davis called to confirm arrangements. My team will be in position by 1:45, Davis said. His voice was professional, calm, but Bumpy could hear the tension underneath. We'll be listening to the wire. If anything goes wrong, if you say the word red, or if we hear any indication that you're in immediate danger, we breach immediately. Understand, I understand, Bumpy replied. You're sure about this? Davis asked. We could arrest them now. We have enough evidence. We have enough to convict Torino, Bumpy said, but I want all of them. Every man who laughed. Every man who thought violence was power. Every man who believed I was too small or too scared or too stupid to fight back. I want them all in one room with guns in their hands and murder in their hearts. I want the evidence so overwhelming that their lawyers give up before the trial even starts. I want this airtight. Davis was quiet for 3 seconds. 45 minutes. If you're not out by 3:15, we're coming in regardless. I'll be out, Bumpy said. One way or another. He hung up, checked the tape recorder one final time, small enough to hide under his shirt, sensitive enough to pick up conversations from 15 feet away. He taped it to his chest, making sure the wire was secure, making sure nothing would shift or rattle or give away its presence. Then he picked up his briefcase, the same leather briefcase he'd been carrying for 3 years. The one that didn't contain a weapon but something far more dangerous. Evidence. Documentation. Proof. 3 years' worth of crimes recorded. Catalogued. Ready to be presented like a prosecutor's closing argument. Bumpy walked out of his apartment, got in the Cadillac, drove toward Little Italy knowing that in 90 minutes, either Vincent Torino would be in federal custody or Bumpy Johnson would be in a morgue. No middle ground, no negotiations, just the cold mathematics of a trap inside a trap and the question of which one would spring first. Romano's restaurant appeared exactly as Bumpy had imagined it. Windows dark. Door locked, the kind of locked that said someone's life was about to end inside and the people responsible didn't want witnesses. Bumpy parked the Cadillac, left the engine running, sat for 30 seconds, controlling his breathing, clearing his mind, preparing himself for what came next. Then he opened the door and stepped out, alone. No backup, no weapons. Just a man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase walking toward his own execution like he was going to discuss quarterly profits. He knocked twice on the door. Inside. Tommy Marchetti rose to his feet, shotgun held low. He unlocked the door, pulled it open. Bumpy stepped across the threshold, and the door sealed behind him with a heavy click that sounded exactly like a trap snapping shut. That was when the laughter started. Vincent Torino sat at the back table, and when he saw Bumpy walk through that door alone, something inside him broke. Laughter exploded from his chest. Loud, uncontrolled, the kind of laughter that came from witnessing something so absurd it bypassed rational thought and went straight to pure amusement. This arrogant bastard actually showed up alone, Torino's voice boomed through the restaurant. Look at him dressed like he's going to church, like this is a business meeting instead of an execution. Tommy started laughing, then Paulie, then all 8 men. Their voices merged into a chorus of mockery that filled the space like smoke. Bumpy stood just inside the entrance. His face showed nothing. No fear. No anger. Just calm observation. He started walking toward Torino's table. His shoes clicked against the tile floor. Each step measured. Controlled. The briefcase swung slightly with his movement. He really thinks he's walking out of here. Carmine wheezed between fits of laughter. Look at his face, he thinks we're going to talk. Bumpy reached the table, set the briefcase down, looked at Torino with those same eyes that had been recording insults for 3 years. You wanted to talk. Vincent, Bumpy said calmly. So let's talk. Torino gestured to the empty chair, still grinning. Sit down. Let's be civilized before we get to the uncivilized parts. He leaned forward. You've been stepping on my territory for 3 years, making my organization look weak. That can't continue. You understand what I'm saying. Bumpy sat. Around him, 8 guns were pointed at different parts of his body. 1 man, 8 weapons. 0 chance of survival unless something changed dramatically. But something was about to change. Bumpy reached for the briefcase. Every gun in the room elevated. 8 hammers cocked. 8 fingers touched triggers. But what Bumpy pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a folder. Thick. Stuffed with papers and photographs that spilled across the table. You wanted to know why I walked into your trap, Bumpy said quietly. Because I needed all of you in one place. All 8 of you here simultaneously with the door locked. Because in about 60 seconds, the FBI is going to breach that door with a warrant for your arrests. Illegal weapons trafficking through the waterfront. Racketeering. Conspiracy. All supported by 3 years of evidence I've been collecting. Torino's smile vanished. His face went the color of old milk. "You're lying. The photographs show your people unloading crates of M1 rifles stolen from Fort Dix," Bumpy continued. "The documents show bribes paid to customs officials. The recordings have your voice discussing prices, quantities, delivery schedules, federal crimes, Vincent, the kind that carry 20-year minimum sentences." Bumpy glanced at his watch. 30 seconds. Outside. Car doors slammed. Multiple vehicles. Heavy footsteps approaching. Torino stood so fast his chair fell backward. His hand grabbed the Colt .45 but froze halfway because the equation had just changed completely. "Shoot, Bumpy, and the FB. I hears the gunshot and storms in with murder charges added to everything else." The front door exploded inward. Kicked hard. The frame splintered and 6 FBI agents in dark suits came through with revolvers drawn. "Federal agents. Nobody move hands where we can see them." 8 guns clattered to the floor. Torino's .45. Tommy's shotgun. All of them hitting tile and skittering across the floor like they'd suddenly become too hot to hold. Agent Robert Davis walked in behind his team. His eyes found Bumpy, still seated calmly at the table. "Mr. Johnson, are you all right?" "Fine, Agent Davis," Bumpy replied, "just finishing a conversation about respect." Davis turned to Torino. "Vincent Torino, you're under arrest for trafficking stolen military weapons, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and 15 other federal charges my colleagues are going to read to you on the way downtown." 2 agents moved forward with handcuffs. Torino stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, his brain trying to process how the trap he'd built had become his cage. Then his knees buckled. Vincent Torino. The man who'd laughed 90 seconds ago, who'd mocked Bumpy for having the audacity to show up alone, dropped to his knees on the restaurant floor. "Bumpy," Torino's voice cracked. His hands were shaking. "Bumpy, please, we can negotiate. We can work something out. I have money. I have connections. We can make a deal." Bumpy stood, picked up his briefcase, looked down at the man who was now on his knees, begging, his face pale, and his voice breaking. "And now you're not laughing anymore, are you, Vincent?" Bumpy's voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent restaurant like a judge reading a verdict. He walked toward the door while federal agents processed what would become a crime scene. As he passed Torino, he stopped. "You spent 6 months planning this meeting," Bumpy said. "I spent 3 years planning your arrest. You thought violence was power. I proved that information is power. You thought I was too small to matter. I showed you that intelligence matters more than intimidation. Every time you laughed at me, I added another page of evidence. Every time you disrespected me, I added another witness. Every time you thought you were winning, you were actually building your own prison cell." Bumpy stepped out into the spring afternoon. Behind him, handcuffs clicked closed around 8 pairs of wrists. The sounds echoed through Romano's like gavels falling in a courtroom. The man who'd been laughing was now on his knees crying. And all of Harlem was watching. Torino got 20 years in federal prison. The judge handed down the sentence in a courtroom so quiet you could hear the bailiffs breathing. Torino stood there in an orange jumpsuit, listening to the rest of his life being measured out in decades instead of days. No smile now, no laughter. Just hollow eyes finally understanding what underestimation costs. He served 18 years before lung cancer finished what the law started. Died in the prison infirmary at 2:47 in the morning with no family present. No flowers sent. The man who once controlled the Manhattan waterfront died alone in a room that smelled like bleach and failure. The 8 men who laughed alongside him that day at Romano's got a combined total of 160 years. Tommy Marchetti, the one with the sawed-off shotgun who grinned widest when Bumpy walked through the door. got 22 years. Died in Attica during a riot in 1971. Paulie Greco served 19 years before a heart attack took him in the prison yard. He was 51. Looked 70. 3 years into his sentence. Torino sat in the prison library playing chess with a cellmate. He stared at the board, seeing a trap he'd walked into 3 moves earlier. "I underestimated him," Torino said quietly, "and it killed me." Everyone in federal prison knew the story. It got told in cell blocks and mess halls like a cautionary tale written in legal briefs and ruined lives. Bumpy Johnson. I laughed at him, called him Harlem Boy like it was an insult. Torino moved his rook without thinking. He let me laugh. The whole time. He was building a case that would bury me. Every time I underestimated him. He was taking notes. 3 years of evidence I handed him myself because I was too arrogant to see the trap. That realization killed Vincent Torino long before the cancer reached his lungs, while Torino counted years in a cell. Bumpy took control of the Manhattan waterfront without firing a single shot. Clean contracts, fair rates, no violence, just business conducted the way it was supposed to be when criminals weren't bleeding it dry. The phrase that became legendary in Harlem was something Bumpy said 2 weeks after Torino's conviction, "When they mock you. Remember it. Then turn their laughter into evidence." That became the blueprint, not just for handling disrespect, but for operating in a world where building a federal case was more effective than building a body count. The Italian families pulled out of Harlem completely, not because of guns or bombs. They left because Torino's arrest sent a message intelligence was more dangerous than any weapon. The lesson that got passed down became part of Harlem's history. Never mock the silent man. He's listening, he's watching, and he's planning. Torino learned that lesson 90 seconds too late. Bumpy died in 1968 of a heart attack. In his bed, surrounded by people who respected him. His gravestone didn't say gangster or boss. It said strategist. One word that captured everything about how he operated. The story of March 15, 1962 became the template. When young operators asked how to handle disrespect, old-timers would tell them about Bumpy walking into Romano's, about Torino's laughter turning to panic in 90 seconds, about 8 guns hitting the floor and 8 men learning that arrogance was the most expensive mistake they would ever make. 90 seconds. That's how long it took to transform laughter into pleading, to turn contempt into handcuffs, to prove that the man they mocked was the architect of their destruction. Vincent Torino spent 18 years in a cell understanding, too late, that he should have shown respect instead of mockery. Real power doesn't announce itself with laughter. It builds in silence. It waits with patience that looks like weakness until the moment arrives to prove it was strength all along.